Forget elves, forget goblins, forget everything you think you know about mythology being pure fiction, because I'm about to tell you something absolutely fundamental about the prehistoric world. Sometimes the most ridiculous, majestic, and terrifying things are the ones that actually existed. The fossil record isn't just dusty bones. It's a bestiary of creatures so bizarre and over-engineered that they make modern animals look like prototypes. These are the things that inspired the legends, the real mythical monsters walking around before our ancestors even invented agriculture. I've compiled the 5 most fantastical extinct animals. We're talking about creatures that defy logic. These are the ones that prove nature, when it was feeling especially creative, was far better at making a mythical beast than any human writer could ever be. We are starting with number 5, the majestic weirdo that time forgot. Civatherium, the giraffe sunflower. Look at a modern giraffe.
Tall, graceful, neck for days. Now, trash that image, because the Civatherium was the anti-giraffe. It was the absolute unit version, built like a tank, but with headgear that looks like someone stapled giant flattened velvet hands to its skull. The Civatherium was not a towering, spindly creature searching for leaves high in the canopy. Oh no, this thing was a power browser that lived in Africa and India during the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. Think massive shoulders, a neck that was thick and muscular like a bull's, and legs sturdy enough to support a weight nearing 1,250 kilograms. It was closer in bulk to a modern moose, maybe even heavier, but with the general body plan of a short-necked okapi. But let's get to the weird part, the part that makes it look like it escaped from the background of an ancient temple carving, the head. Instead of the smooth, small ossicones you see on a giraffe, the Civatherium sported 2 distinct pairs of horns. The first pair stuck out over its eyes like short, stubby giraffe horns. Whatever. The second pair, though, these things were insane. They were these enormous, flattened, branching structures that spread out laterally across its head. They weren't antlers that shed yearly like a deer's. They were permanent bone structures covered in skin and thick fur, much like the ossicones of a modern giraffe. They looked less like horns and more like giant velvet serving trays, or maybe the petals of a massive armored flower, hence the name some people give it, the giraffe sunflower. And yes, I know what you're thinking. How did this thing ever fit through the trees? The working theory is that these giant structures weren't primarily for fighting other Civatherium, though they certainly could have been used for broadside shoving matches.
They were likely a display feature, a massive, ridiculous sign of dominance and genetic fitness, telling every competitor and potential mate that I can afford to haul this much bone around. I often look at the sheer biological expense of features like this, the weight, the muscle required to hold that head up, the sheer annoyance of trying to navigate thick brush, and I just shake my head. Evolution truly loves to flex when it can. It gives an animal a ridiculous piece of anatomy, a signature piece of armor, and then just says, deal with it. The Civatherium was a contemporary of early humans in its range, particularly in India. And guess what? There are ancient rock art depictions in places like the Sahara that show animals strikingly similar to the Civatherium. This suggests that the animal survived long enough to become a living legend, perhaps feeding into the folklore of enormous horned cattle or guardians of the ancient forests.
When you see something this majestic, this bizarre, and this imposing, you don't forget it. You draw it on the walls of your cave, and you tell your kids about the giant flower-horned beast that watched you harvest berries, a truly peak performance ancient megafauna. But if Civatherium was a legendary sentinel, the next animal was a straight-up real-life dragon. Microraptor, the 4-winged nightmare. For the longest time, when we thought of dinosaurs, we thought of giant lizards stomping around in green swamps, usually looking drab gray or swampy brown. That was the old science. But then we found the Microraptor, and suddenly the whole history book needed a rewrite, maybe with a lot more glitter. The Microraptor was a dromaeosaurid, a relative of Velociraptor, but tiny. We're talking crow-sized, maybe 2 feet long including the tail, a short king predator. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in sheer, unbelievable biology.
Microraptor didn't just have feathers on its arms. It had feathers on its arms, its tail, and crucially, it had long airfoil-shaped feathers on its legs too. That means this creature, living about 120 million years ago in the early Cretaceous of China, had 4 distinct wings. Imagine that. A tiny feathered predator that could leap from a tree branch, spread its arms and legs, and suddenly deploy 4 separate wings. It's not just 4 wings, it's an aerodynamically complex, highly adjustable system. Scientists have spent decades modeling how this creature moved, concluding that it likely glided or swooped between trees, using its lower wings to control pitch and steering. It was a biplane, naturally evolved about 100 million years before the Wright brothers even existed. And this is where it gets truly mythological. Recent fossil analysis of structures called melanosomes, which are responsible for pigment, showed something absolutely stunning.
The Microraptor wasn't dull gray. Its feathers likely had an iridescent sheen, a deep, reflective blue-black, like an oil slick or a crow's wing caught in the sunlight. So, stack it up. You have a small, hyper-carnivorous dragon relative equipped with 4 functional wings and covered head to toe in shimmering, iridescent black feathers. Tell me that doesn't sound like a creature pulled straight from a medieval bestiary, maybe called the shadow flapper or the jeweled serpthird. It was a 4-winged, shimmering, silent nightmare that dropped out of the canopy onto small lizards and mammals. Absolutely peak nightmare fuel performance, all wrapped up in a 2-pound package. The Microraptor wasn't merely a precursor to birds. It was an evolutionary side quest into pure fantasy. It showcases just how aggressively experimental nature was when it was solving the riddle of flight. It tried the biplane approach, found it effective for gliding in dense forests, and then moved on.
But for a brief, glorious period, the forests of China were populated by tiny, shimmering 4-winged dragons. But if the Microraptor was a sleek aerial menace, our next entry was a rolling, heavily armored castle, Glyptodon, the walking fortification. Welcome to Pleistocene South America, a landscape of giant sloths, terror birds, and predators like Smilodon. And then you have the Glyptodon. This is where paleontology decides to invent a medieval siege weapon and then make it biologically viable. The Glyptodon was basically a gigantic armadillo. When I say gigantic, I mean car-sized, seriously. The largest species, Dodecurus, could weigh over 2 tons, the size and weight of a Volkswagen Beetle, if that beetle had a dome-shaped roof made of pure, fused bone. The most defining feature, the thing that makes it look like it's wearing enchanted armor, is its carapace. This wasn't like a turtle shell or a modern armadillo's segmented scales.
The Glyptodon carapace was a monolithic dome of hundreds of interlocking bony plates called osteoderms. These plates were often etched with geometric patterns, fitting together seamlessly like a perfectly constructed, unbreakable mosaic. I mean, look at the geometry of this thing. It looks less like an animal structure and more like ancient runic armor forged by dwarves. It was impervious. A Smilodon trying to bite this thing would be signing up for a career change, maybe dentistry. And speaking of career changes, the Glyptodon also had the most metal tail accessory ever devised. The tail was encased in bony rings, culminating in a gigantic spiked club, sometimes armed with sharp, heavy bony studs. This was not a subtle tool. It was a massive, weaponized pendulum swung at high velocity. If you were a predator attempting to flip the sky over, that tail was going to introduce itself to your teeth, ribs, or skull, and it would not be a polite introduction. The sheer bone density and mass of that tail club alone screams, "Do not mess with me." The Glyptodon was so robust that it created an interesting dynamic with the earliest human arrivals in the Americas. When the Paleo-Indians showed up, they were dealing with the biggest land mammals on Earth, and the Glyptodon was slow, predictable, and heavily armored. The theory goes, and this is incredible, that while killing a Glyptodon was difficult, the payoff was huge. Once dead, the massive shell became a resource. Think about it, a dome of bone, perfectly shaped, easily 4 to 5 feet across. Early humans likely hauled the cleaned-out shell back to their camp and used it as immediate ready-made shelter, a small, portable house. They weren't just eating the meat, they were setting up camp inside the dead animal's armor. That's a level of practical myth-making that's hard to beat. The Glyptodon wasn't just a creature of legend. Its shell became a legendary home.
It literally carried a castle on its back, and then passed that castle on to the first humans who found it. Now,
If Glyptodon was the siege weaponry of the Pleistocene, the next entry was the crowning royalty of the Ice Age. Megaloceros, the majestic king of the forest. You might know this creature as the Irish elt, which is a bit of a misnomer because it wasn't exclusively Irish and it wasn't technically an elk, it was a giant deer. But whatever you call it, the Megaloceros giganteus was the epitome of prehistoric majesty. If evolution had a budget for pure, ostentatious elegance, it blew it all on this animal's headgear. Picture the deepest, mistiest European forest, maybe 10,000 years ago, smelling of damp earth and pine. Then, through the fog, steps a stag that isn't just large, it is monolithic. The Megaloceros stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, taller than the largest modern moose. It was a 6-foot 7-inch wall of muscle and dominance.
But the antlers, my God, the antlers. The antlers of the Megaloceros were the largest of any known deer species ever. They spanned up to 3.6 meters, or nearly 12 feet from tip to tip. That is wider than a modern sedan. They were massive, palmate structures, not skinny branches, but broad, shovel-like sheets of bone, forming a majestic, heavy crown above its head. I have to stop here and emphasize the sheer metabolic nightmare of this. These antlers were shed and regrown every single year. Think about the energy cost. Antler growth is one of the fastest rates of tissue growth in the animal kingdom. To produce 12 feet of solid bone covered in velvet in just a few short months, it required an astronomical amount of calcium and nutrients, basically demanding that the male spend half his year consuming everything in sight just to build his crown for the next rutting season. The Megaloceros was truly a creature driven by sexual selection run rampant.
The bigger the rack, the better the genetics, but also the heavier the burden. The sheer weight of those antlers, up to 90 pounds, meant every movement had to be calculated. Try navigating a dense forest carrying a set of 12-foot, 90-pound coat racks on your head. There's an old discarded theory that the Megaloceros went extinct because its antlers got too big, trapping it in the forest and preventing it from moving into new grazing areas as the climate changed. While that's probably too simplistic, extinction is usually a complex mix of climate shift and human pressure. It speaks volumes about how unbelievable this animal looked. It was the biological embodiment of go big or go home. It looked like the appointed king of the woods, the one who mediates disputes between mythical forest sprites, the one who deserves the most ornate heavy metal crown. It was elegance, brute force, and metabolic excess all rolled into one giant, short-lived package. They lived alongside early European humans, and their immense size undoubtedly cemented their place as figures of awe and power in ancient folklore. A giant deer with a 12-foot rack is pure fantasy made real. But nothing, absolutely nothing in the history of paleontology comes closer to being a verifiable mythological creature than our #1 entry. Elasmotherium, the true unicorn. If I asked you to describe a unicorn, you'd probably say a pure white horse, slender, maybe a little too sparkly, with a spiraled horn on its forehead, a delicate creature reserved for princess stories. Now throw that image in the garbage disposal, because the Elasmotherium was the reality, and the reality was a 6-ton Siberian tank. The Elasmotherium was a massive prehistoric rhinoceros that roamed the vast cold plains of Eurasia until relatively recently, only going extinct around 39,000 years ago. It's often called the Siberian unicorn, and the name is 100% earned.
Forget the dainty image. This thing was enormous. It stood about 8 feet tall at the shoulder and could stretch 15 feet long. Imagine a modern white rhino, then put it on steroids and double its muscle mass. It was thick-legged, shaggy-haired, we know this from cave paintings and the cold environment it lived in, and had a muscular, highly domed skull. And what about the horn? Oh, the horn! Unlike modern rhinos, which have keratin horns composed of compressed hair fibers, the Elasmotherium didn't have a bony core to the horn itself, but the skull featured a massive dome-shaped protrusion, a natural bone pedestal right above its eyes. This gigantic anchor point suggests that the keratin horn it supported was absolutely colossal. We don't have a perfect fossilized horn
because keratin decomposes easily.
But based on the size of that dome, the horn would have been truly massive, potentially 6 to 7 feet long, thick as a tree trunk at the base and jutting forward off its forehead. Not a delicate spiral, but a single, massive battering ram. It was the definition of an absolute unit, a shaggy, armored 6-ton beast wielding a colossal single horn. And here is where science meets pure folklore. The Elasmotherium didn't just exist, it coexisted with modern humans for tens of thousands of years. As humans migrated across Eurasia, they encountered this living tank with the ridiculously huge single horn. They hunted it, they feared it, and they drew detailed, accurate pictures of it on cave walls alongside mammoths and cave lions. These encounters, passed down through oral traditions for millennia, are almost certainly the genesis of the unicorn myth. Think about the filtering process of memory and legend.
You see a terrifying, massive 6-ton beast with a single, magnificent weapon on its head. You tell the story. 1,000 years later, the details start to change. The rhinoceros bulk morphs into the more familiar shape of a horse, which everyone knows. The terrifying mass is softened into ethereal elegance. The powerful, blunt, deadly horn becomes a spiraled symbol of purity. But the core, the defining feature, the single horn on the forehead, that detail remained. It survived climate change, mass extinctions, and the rise of civilization because it was true. There was a gigantic, single-horned creature wandering the world. When ancient travelers like Ctesias reported back to Greece about the existence of wild, fast, single-horned animals in India, they weren't entirely wrong. They were describing creatures that were distant biological cousins of the Elasmotherium, or maybe even describing the Elasmotherium itself as its population slowly retreated and specialized. It's astonishing. We spend so much time searching for evidence of dragons and griffins, but the Siberian unicorn was hiding in plain sight in our paleontology textbooks the whole time. It was a massive, hairy behemoth built for the cold and armed with a horn that demanded respect. It's the ultimate proof that sometimes the myths that sound the most unbelievable are just history being told badly. These 5 creatures, the armored castle, the iridescent biplane, the 6-ton unicorn, the flower-horned tank, and the crowned deer, they weren't magic. They were just biology flexing its muscles. They are proof that our world, before we got here, was filled with creatures that would look completely at home in the realm of Narnia or Middle-earth. It makes you wonder what else we haven't found yet. What other mythical beasts are just waiting for the shovel and the chisel to reveal their ridiculous, spectacular reality?
If you dug this deep dive into prehistoric fantasy made real, do me a solid and hit that like button. And make sure you are subscribed to The Lost World, because trust me, the depths of history have far weirder things lurking than anything Hollywood could ever invent. Thanks for watching, and until next time on The Lost World.